New Zealanders, as you know, have endured several years of very tough economic conditions. The COVID lockdowns were followed by a huge spike in inflation, soaring interest rates and a cost of living crisis. The impact of high interest rates has been clear across our economy, putting a handbrake on activity, sucking disposable income away from mortgage holders, cramping local businesses and leading to a shrinking economy and lower rates of employment. The good news is that interest rates are now coming down, business and consumer confidence is coming back, and economists are forecasting a return to growth this year. New Zealand needs growth. Growth means more jobs, growing incomes, and more wealth to support much needed investment in our schools, our hospitals, our roads. So the government's Going for Growth plan is about accelerating the immediate economic turnaround while laying the foundations for faster growth in the years ahead. And a critical pillar of this plan is looking out to the world and confidently pursuing greater trade, investment and international opportunities. We simply won't get rich selling to ourselves. Instead, we must take practical steps to encourage our exporters, encourage investment, and critically, give people from around the world good reasons to come to New Zealand to spend and invest. And so my job as Economic Growth Minister is to drive and strengthen efforts across government to support that mission. So ministers have been working hard to identify areas where New Zealand is still performing below its capacity and where there's significant growth potential. The tourism sector is an obvious example. Visitors to New Zealand create many benefits. They spend money with local accommodation providers. They eat and drink in our bars and restaurants. They spend money with local tour operators and other community businesses. And in many cases, they forge connections with New Zealand that lead to future investment, future trade and business opportunities. And while tourist numbers have come back strongly from their COVID lows, the sector still has a lot of room to grow. New Zealand welcomed around 15% fewer tourists in the past year than we welcomed in the pre-COVID era. Those missing tourists represent a hole in the pocket of many Kiwis. So our government is working to fill that gap, and you can expect us to take a number of steps to encourage more people around the world to choose New Zealand as their next holiday destination. So today's announcement is one such practical step. The Digital Nomad Visa will make New Zealand a more attractive destination for travellers who want to work remotely while holidaying in New Zealand. The visa will open the doors to a whole new category of visitors, those wanting to hold on to a job elsewhere while enjoying a change in location and environment. We envisage, based on experiences around the world, that many of these travellers will be highly skilled people with roles that connect them to powerhouse firms and industries globally. These are jobs they hold offshore and that they will be able to stay connected to while in New Zealand. They won't be competing for Kiwi jobs. We envisage these will be particularly high-value tourists, and our advertising campaigns and to promote this initiative will be targeted particularly at highly skilled IT workers from the US and East Asia. The government's ambition is that new visa rules will put New Zealand boldly on the map as a welcoming haven for the world's talent. And we hope that in some cases it will encourage those people and the firms they represent to consider doing more business with New Zealand in future. We want more of the world's wealthy and super talented people coming in those arrival gates behind us. And the new visa will also enable more visitors to New Zealand to extend their stays here, turning a short trip into a longer stay of up to 9 months. And those longer stays mean more income for local businesses, more accommodation nights, more dinners out, more spending in our local shops. And that is good news for everyone. This announcement today is of course one of many steps our government is taking to remove unnecessary hurdles and red tape from the paths of people wanting to invest, innovate, take risks and create opportunities for people. As the Prime Minister noted last week, too often When it comes to economic growth, New Zealand has slipped into a culture of saying no. We have to shift our mindset and embrace it, and part of my job is making the case for that change. Today's announcement is an example of our new approach, and it's conceivable that at some point someone will attempt to bend the rules in a way that's not intended. And the point I would make is that the benefits of making New Zealand a more attractive destination for visitors with sought after talent far outweighs the risks. And I'll now hand over to Erica to make more detailed comments about the new rules.
Thank you. Well, my job as the Minister of Immigration is to support the Minister for Economic Growth and this government's agenda to grow the economy. And there'll be a number of announcements this year in the immigration space, including one around investor visas coming up. But the announcement today is saying yes to tourists, and it does two things. One thing it will do is clear up. If you're coming here on a family holiday, it's okay to check your emails, it's okay to contact the office back home. You can work while you're here on your family holiday. But the second important thing that it does, and the Minister Willis has explained this, is to target the market we have never been able to target before because we didn't have the settings right. And many other countries around the world have a digital nomad type visa, but this visa will be attached, or this visa will be our visitor visa. You will be able to work on a visitor visa. It's simple, it's straightforward, it'll be the same cost as it's always been, there'll be no extra cost, but it'll do two things: clarifying that you can work while you're here, but also targeting this huge new market of high value tourists who can stay for longer, work for their offshore employer, and spend a huge amount of time travelling up and down the country doing some of the amazing things that you can do in New Zealand. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. I just want to add a few comments here. I mean, obviously international tourism is New Zealand's second largest export. We've got masses of opportunity to attract more visitors to New Zealand, and a very key message for us today is that New Zealand is open for business. So I'm focused on making sure that New Zealand is a destination that's easy to get to and open for a wide range of visitors. This particular announcement today is obviously targeting a group that we think will really enjoy the opportunity to have a workcation. So they'll be working here, but taking the opportunity of everything we have on offer. So our cities, our beautiful landscapes, our regions, and the longer they can stay here, so if they can stay here for up to 9 months, they're more likely to travel across New Zealand and explore everything we have on offer. The reality is that international remote workers, we know in other countries, often spend a longer period of time and invest and spend more while they are here. And it is really important that we attract a broad range of visitors to New Zealand. So as I said, my message is really clear. New Zealand is open for business. We welcome visitors of all types to New Zealand. And in this particular announcement, those who are able to work as digital nomads here on our shores. So if you've been thinking about coming to New Zealand, book your trip today. We welcome you with open arms. Come and enjoy the fantastic welcome that overseas visitors know that New Zealanders give and experience our unique experiences.
And to all those tourists who've just enjoyed a couple of great weeks over summer and you're thinking about going back to work, well, you can keep working and stay here for a bit longer.
Have there been any projections from officials about what this might do to tourism numbers?
Sure, look, with the changed rules to the visitor visa, it's hard to know how many we will get in New Zealand, but what we do know from overseas examples is that it is extraordinarily popular. You walk into cities like Barcelona and you can see people working in cafes, clearly digital nomads. They have bespoke visas for that. Ours will just be our visitor visa, but we know it's extraordinarily popular overseas and we've just not been able to access that market.
You campaigned on. Has there been any cost to us to do this tweak, given it's just our visitor visa?
Well, the good thing about this change is we're able to do it really simply and efficiently. We could have spent a year creating a new visa, but as the Minister of Economic Growth has said, we need to be open for business now, and it was a really simple, straightforward change that we could make today. And also, it kills two birds with one stone. We can tell visitors when they're here, it's okay that you work, while having these digital nomads at the same time.
We've campaigned over 12 months, I think. This is 9 months now. When you, in 2023, you campaigned on a digital nomad visa. Was it 12 months? How long was
You're
it?
testing my memory now, but I'm not sure we put an amount of months on it.
Right. So and this is just
And
this is just 9.
as the minister now, with my full suite of officials, as I said, we didn't create a new visa with new months attached. We just went with our visitor visa, and the visitor visa can be extended up to 9 months. What you'll see is many tourists only come for 3 months because they're not able to
And
work.
if you come from a visa waiver country like the US,
Yes.
you can just
Yes.
walk through the gate and then you've got 9 months to work.
These conditions are attached to your ETA. So if you're coming from a visa waiver country, typically you get about 3 months on that visa waiver. After that period of time, you would, as you are now, having to apply for a visitor visa to stay longer. But the conditions of that visa are you can work wherever you like.
Given you did campaign on this, and this is now about economic growth, do you regret not implementing it last year when the economy was not growing?
Look, we had a number of challenges last year. Firstly, you will remember we had record levels of arrivals and immigration was unsustainable at that time, and we also had a huge problem with migrant exploitation. We had to spend last year getting that under control, and we have done. The next thing off the rank was to sort our work visa, again to support growth. This was always going to be the next cab off the rank. Those were very important things we had to fix first.
You say there'll be a spend on advertising. Could you go into how much that's actually going to be and what the return is expected to be on that?
Sure. Look, Immigration New Zealand, as the Minister said, are going to be targeting Southeast Asia and America in the first instance, and I think our budget is around 100,000. So we'll test the water and see how that goes, and then potentially break out into new markets with more spend later, depending on what the Minister of Finance does in the next budget.
And are you confident that'll bring at least 100,000 back into New Zealand?
Look, I'm pretty confident we'll make that many times over. The types of visitors that we, and digital nomads that we'll be attracting, are highly skilled, well-paid individuals, and I expect in their time here that they will spend longer than they normally would. They will spend more because they're here for longer. And the thing that we're really hoping is they fall in love with the place, or maybe they fall in love with the Kiwi, and they end up staying.
That's right, and look, I'm looking forward to some extra GST coming through, because every time a visitor shops at a local shop or buys dinner at a local restaurant, New Zealanders receive GST off that spending, not to mention the jobs that supports in local cafes and restaurants. You know, here in Wellington, you can feel the drop in tourism numbers, and you'll have many people in hospitality tell you that when there's a few more tourists coming through the city, it's better for growth. So we know that we're still not at the tourism numbers we were able to have in 2019. We want those numbers higher, and we're sure that this new visa will attract a whole new group of people.
What did you mean when you said that you expected some people might try to bend the rules?
Well, what I'm simply saying is there's always a reason why people haven't done these things in the past. This is something new, and I anticipate that there will be people who will say, oh well, what if they're breaking the rules? What if they do this in a way that's not intended? Well, actually we've got to back ourselves that we can monitor this effectively, and that it will invite new tourists and not find a dozen reasons to say no, which unfortunately has been the habit for too many years.
Will it require more monitoring from Immigration New Zealand in terms of checking in on people, making sure they've got the correct visa?
Look, these visas, you have to remember, are short-term, short-stay visas, really. They're not here for many years, they're here for up to 9 months. As Nicola said, we want to be saying yes to these people. We're not going to be checking up how many emails they're sending and how many days they're spending. We just want them to be here and spending their hard-earned money in our country.
They could be here for 9 months and send a few emails, and that would be enough to get the digital nomad visitor visa.
They will need to look after their own tax affairs. Once they've been here for a certain amount of time, they will need to declare themselves as a New Zealand tax resident, and that is up to them.
Yeah.
A lot of countries that are targeting digital nomads are offering sort of tax breaks, and also when they arrive, they know that they'll be able to stay for a year without having to, extend visas and not have the uncertainty of that. Are we going to be competitive if we're not matching those sorts of terms?
This is the most beautiful country in the world. You bet we're competitive.
Minister, do you have any ballpark figure of what the GST tax savings might be? Do you have any sort of numbers around that?
As the Minister said, it's very challenging to model what the increase in visitor numbers as a consequence of this change will be. We share an ambition that this year we will be getting many more visitors to New Zealand as tourists than we did last year, and that of course has a significant impact for jobs, for GST and for growth in the economy.
Have you spoken to any high tourism areas about whether they have the infrastructure to support sort of long-term camping workers?
Yeah, look, the reality is most parts of New Zealand recognise that while we're not at the 2019 levels, we want more visitors, their businesses want more customers. If we get to a situation quickly, which would actually be a great problem to have, then absolutely we need to look at that more carefully. Queenstown obviously is an exception. They have a few additional challenges. But look, my goal, very simply, is to say to the world, New Zealand is open for business, we want visitors, so come on in.
New Zealand's slowest recovering major tourism market is China. It's still 50% of pre-COVID levels. Tourism experts say China's a very cost-sensitive market. You've obviously put up the visitor levy and visitor visa fees with the visa fee increase. Are you looking at, do you regret that at all? Could you look at reducing them somehow, to help that massive market?
Well, the feedback that I received from a big operator on Friday, who was responsible for a lot of visitors in from China, is saying actually they just want to know that New Zealand is welcoming them. So my message very clearly, for someone in China who's considering whether or not to book a holiday in New Zealand, we would welcome you. We would welcome you with open arms to come and visit New Zealand, whether you want to be on a digital nomad visa or whether you just want to come and have a holiday with your family, you are welcome here.
What do you make of the state of the Wellington economy, and why do you think things are, I suppose, the way that they are?
Look, I think that the Wellington economy, like economies across New Zealand, has suffered with a cost of living crisis, a period of very high interest rates. That has been challenging for many Wellington families, for many Wellington businesses. And so as we look to the year ahead, we are looking at lower interest rates. That means more disposable income for many mortgage holders, more ability for local businesses to borrow, to invest, to grow. Wellington has great prospects. Tourism is absolutely part of Wellington's future, as is the film industry, as is its scientific and tech industry, as is its education industry. So Wellington is one region that will benefit from this announcement, but it's very much intended to benefit regions across the country.
Just a more general question. Do you think privatisation is necessary for economic growth in New Zealand?
I think it's necessary for us to manage the government's assets as well as possible, because New Zealanders have tens of billions of dollars worth of their wealth tied up in the assets that the government owns, and so we need to be making the most of those assets. It's true that the government will continue to own significant numbers of roads, of hospitals, of schools, that's right. But when we are building new infrastructure or building new assets, we always need to make sure we're making the best use of a dollar. The private sector has a role to play. If you look to our energy markets, for example, there is widespread private ownership of some of our energy generation. If you look at our ports, there is private investment in our ports and our airports. So there is a role for the private sector and the disciplines that it brings.
And it sounds like you're saying there's a role for privatisation in terms of making the most of assets, whether it's new infrastructure or existing infrastructure.
What I judge it by is what will allow for the best service to be delivered in a way that represents the best value for taxpayers. That's really important, and there are strategic reasons why the government will continue to own a number of assets, and in some cases we're best placed to own those assets, and we have the economies of scale that mean that's why we've traditionally owned them. But should we be open to looking at how we can do things better for taxpayers? Yes, every day of the week.
If there's no, just a quick sub, if there's no plan to allow asset sales this term, how is rolling out the welcome mat for foreign investment in key infrastructure in New Zealand not going to result in asset sales down the line?
Well, the first thing that we're seeing already is that we are receiving unsolicited proposals from international firms wanting to help us build new infrastructure for New Zealand. So wanting to invest in New Zealand, but also we are laying out the roads of national significance, for example, that we want to build, and we are soliciting interest from private sector players who might want to invest in those alongside the government. So that represents significant opportunity, and we'll have more to say about that that at our investment summit next in a couple of months. But beyond that, as we look to the future, as I say, I think the measure should be, does this give a better deal for New Zealanders? Will they have their services guaranteed? And can we get better value for their money?
Can you give some detail on those unsolicited proposals?
Not today.
You're receiving those purpose statements about the assets that we own at the moment. Have any of those purpose statements come back and said actually the government shouldn't? There's no good reason for the government to own?
Yes, so to refresh for those without the context for Thomas's question, we have asked the Treasury to look at the assets that the government owns and ask itself whether we're doing a good job managing them, why we own them and whether they're delivering well to their purpose. And they have identified some areas where they think that the entity is no longer delivering as well as it should to its purpose, and where we should consider other ways of managing that asset or getting more from it. And we will have more to say about that in the future.
Which entities are those?
We'll have more to say about that in the future.
One entity that David Seymour, I think, mentioned in his speech was quotable value. You know, it has many private competitors who seem to do just as good a job as quotable value does. Does it still make sense for the government to own quotable value?
And I think that will be a question for New Zealanders to consider, because when I talk to New Zealanders, they tell me that the assets they really care about are their local schools, their local hospitals, their local transport connections. And I think if you were to ask them to rank where quotable value sits on that list, schools, hospitals and roads would probably sit higher.
How common are digital nomad visas around the world?
Sorry.
How common are digital nomad visas around the world?
They're relatively common.
So we've been slow off the blocks?
We have been slow off the blocks, which is why we talked about it in opposition and saw it as a real opportunity. But actually coming in as the minister and understanding that there are other issues around just general visitors who are coming here and working, it was a great opportunity to clear up both of those things. So we're excited to start getting out there and promoting it.
Do you anticipate there'll be any, the digital nomad visa will put any pressure on housing in New Zealand? 9 months is a long time to be in a hotel, say, or an Airbnb, so people might look to short-term rent properties. We know the rental market's under pressure. Any thought around that?
Well, we know that they certainly won't be buying at this point, but we also expect that they move around. We know from other countries that they don't tend to settle in one place. They tend to move around as they're working to see the country. So I'm not expecting enormous numbers enough to make a difference, but also I'm expecting them to move around, and so you shouldn't see any impact.
Are these then the best tourists to focus on for economic growth, considering you're not here for a huge amount of time necessarily and you're just expecting a bit of GST take as they move around?
Well, I think it makes sense in two ways. The first is it makes sense because we will be able to attract a broader range of people than might currently consider New Zealand. There's a whole category of people who want to be in a place where they can keep working. Right now, they can't do that in New Zealand. So it attracts a new category of people right now this year. In fact, the visa is open today, so from today. The second thing that I think is very important is these are people who are highly skilled. They're skilled enough that their employer is happy for them to work from a country at the other end of the earth because they're so valuable to them. And so I want them to know about New Zealand. I want them to form relationships with New Zealand businesses to see what we have going here, so that when they go home, they talk to their employer and their industry about potential partnerships in New Zealand, potential investments here. I see this as opening the door for future productivity. Great, thanks.
Thanks very much.